So welcome. My name is Adam Tuliper. I'm a technical evangelist with Microsoft. And this session is App Economy Opportunities for HTML JavaScript Developers, in other words, web developers. If you are here for this session as well, there's going to be kind of crossover. Most of you probably heard a couple folks trickling in. They kind of messed up the session abstract and title, and one says one thing and one says the other. So they kind of blend into each other. So if you're here for one or not the other, it doesn't matter. We're going to kind of merge them both together and get the best of both worlds here. I'm a technical evangelist with Microsoft. You can find me on Twitter at Adam Tuliper. And one of the great things that I love about my job, so okay, you're an evangelist, you evangelize a platform for whomever you work for, but the cool thing that I love about my job is I get to work a lot with professional developers, one-on-one with professional developers, students, aspiring developers, game companies, professional software development companies. So everybody on our team, we provide this thing called O-Hours. And through the O-Hours site, you can go on and find you can find me on there at ohours.org/AdamTuliper, and you can just book a time slot with me. It's free. I do it every week. Tuesday's generally my day, and talk about whatever technology-wise. You know, of course, I would prefer it to be somewhere Microsoft related. It doesn't have to be. If you have questions about anything that you see here today, or if you're eventually looking at moving something on the platform, you're just wondering where we are in the market, or anything along those lines. Relationship advice, recipes. It can really be anything, but you know, of course I would prefer technology. My blog's over at completedevelopment.blogspot.com, and you don't have to book the time there with me. If you have any questions about anything that you see here today, feel free to email me. I'm easy to find, adamT@microsoft.com. I got real lucky when they gave me that alias when I started. Somebody had left and 6 years passed, so I'm reusing his alias. So I get notified when his flights are late and his car's ready. All the things, important things he doesn't get notified of. Anybody in here ever hear of pluralsight.com? Anybody use Pluralsight? Cool. So Pluralsight is an awesome online training resource, kind of like lynda.com. Professional development videos for whatever your specialty is. I'm also a pluralsight.com author, MSDN magazine author. After this session, I'll be over at the Microsoft booth. So please come on over, check out some devices, or if you want to talk about anything from here today or whatever, I'll be over there until 6 p.m. as well. So we got a lot to cover. We're going to start out with a multi-platform approach. Since this is app economy, there are many app economies. So we'll kind of brush a little bit on the multiple economies and some options there. Look at some tools and resources you can use. Being, of course, that I work for Microsoft, we're going to talk about some of the opportunity with Windows 8 because it provides native HTML JavaScript application developers a very unique opportunity. We're going to go over some samples, analytics, and monetization, which are very important in an application. How many of you are running analytics in any of your applications? Okay, about 5 or 6 folks. It's easy to do, and we'll see it's very, very easy to do, and it's absolutely essential. So the first subject we're going to run through is PhoneGap. Anybody here currently running PhoneGap? Cool. Anybody here had never heard of PhoneGap? Excellent. So PhoneGap is really the most robust multi-platform HTML base available. And I say base because it provides you a way to do translation between JavaScript code to some native device layer. It doesn't provide you controls to use in your application. It's really a base to use. And there's a lot of other products based off of that. Now, one of the things that you hear about with PhoneGap is that performance can be an issue. JavaScript is on just about every platform single-threaded. As such, it creates some issues with performance, including issues in PhoneGap. Now, there's a huge variety of devices out there. Some newer devices don't have the same issue. A lot of older devices do with performance. When you use PhoneGap, the idea with PhoneGap, again, is it provides you device-specific API access. If you want to do geolocation, if you want to get pictures, you want to access the camera, it does not provide you a UI to use. So that's in the hands of the developer. And whenever you're looking at going cross-platform or developing something on a platform, one of the questions that comes up, well, do I want to do this as a native UI, or do I want something that is consistent across each of my platforms? And there's really arguments on both sides of this. With a native UI, you get the best user experience. It's what they expect. They open up an application and it looks like whatever platform you're on. It looks like it's got the control of iOS or whatever currently your platform is. When you go with a consistent UI, then you're going with something like jQuery Mobile or your own libraries or any one of the plethora of third-party libraries out there. The problem with that is you're losing what seems to be a native experience on devices. As such, when you have a pure JavaScript and HTML approach, you can have certain slowness on various devices. Newer devices can run your UI great. I've seen people say, I have no performance issues with jQuery mobile at all. It works great on my devices while they're running brand new top-of-the-line devices. Realize that the majority of the world out there runs older devices, lower powered devices as well, not necessarily older, but also lower powered devices. So if you're in something like PhoneGap and you want to do native UIs, then you have to start writing plugins. And then things get a little bit messier. On Windows 8, and we'll look at this in a little bit, you actually don't have to write plugins because we provide native HTML JavaScript support for packaged applications that you can sell in a Windows Store. Then you don't have to provide plugins through PhoneGap. So the basics of PhoneGap, and we're just going to look a little bit at PhoneGap and move on to some other things here. The idea is you can either create a new project and add PhoneGap support to it, or you can create a new PhoneGap project from scratch. They have some build templates that'll create a basic project for you. On iOS and Android and Windows Phone, the way the magic happens is there's essentially a bridge sitting in your native application that the JavaScript layer communicates with. And so as such, there can be some slowness with that. On Windows 8, because it supports a native HTML JavaScript applications, there's actually no PhoneGap bridge. There's just a single JavaScript file that gets included from PhoneGap, and bam, you're up and running with PhoneGap. PhoneGap has a really cool thing called a build server. If you're looking at doing multi-platform development, you almost can't go wrong with PhoneGap using a build server out there. Let's kind of look at what gets supported with that and what that's all about. I simply downloaded PhoneGap on here. Who in here has used PhoneGap? I think there's about 7 folks, right? 8 folks? Okay. So for the folks that haven't, and this might be, maybe some of this hopefully will be new for some of the folks that have. The idea, you can come in here and state, I want to create a new PhoneGap template. We'll just call this PhoneGap Win 8. PG Win 8. And that creates a project for you. If you want to do the same thing for Android, you go to the Android folder, and you would do the same thing for Android in there. And this will create your basic application templates for you. This gives you some source that's all ready to go. So if I load up that folder that just got created for me, because I chose the Windows 8 folder, this gives me a Windows 8 package. Again, if I do iOS, if I do Android, if I do BlackBerry, I'll get the same resulting source code folder with source code specific to that platform. Let's open up this project file because there's something interesting that PhoneGap build does for you. And since I just upgraded to 8.1 on here, I'm going to retarget this application to run as 8.1. Actually, we don't even have to do that. Let me make sure my emulator started here. So this is my template to start. This actually will get, I'm running this in Visual Studio, our development tool. There's a free version and a not free version. There's essentially a pay version. It's got a bazillion features in it. There's a free version called Visual Studio Express. But if we look at the structure here, this is my main HTML file. In it, we have a little bit of JavaScript. We have a reference to Cordova.js. There's no other binary wrapper around this that you would see on a different platform. And this says device is ready. I'm going to put Windows 8 build, or is it? And you'll see why I do that. I'm going to go ahead and run this the first time. This essentially compiles it and deploys it to my local machine and runs it. So think of something like an iPad, right? You have a standalone application on here. These applications are just like that. They run in a secure environment. They essentially are sandbox applications. They respond to different events. They're essentially touch-friendly applications. But everything that I'm doing right here, this is a complete application package that has been compiled and deployed to my local system. Technically, if this application did something, I could send it up to the Windows Store and sell it for a ton of money. Not for this application right here. Another thing that you get by default on the platform is really cool JavaScript debugging. Set a breakpoint and it just works. If I want, I can step into my Cordova libraries here. But so we have, notice the text that showed up on here. This was Windows 8 build, or is it? So I'm going to go ahead and zip up this folder. then after I zip this up, I'm going to upload it. So this is PG18. Cool little shortcut for any of you that do use a Windows machine. If you actually copy a file, and if you go to a text box, it'll just paste out the path of that file. Why is that useful? Because if we go to the PhoneGap site, PhoneGap build, and I say I want to upload an application here, it says, hey, choose the file. Well, now I can just paste that path right into there. Let's upload, and let's see how fast the carrier pigeons are working from Moscone Center out to the rest of the world. I plugged into this connection here, so I have a little advantage. When I was working out there, I was like, tick, tock. I grew this beard while I was sitting out there waiting. Now, it's automatically going ahead and building for the separate platforms. Now, something very interesting to note here. I uploaded a Windows build, and it's actually taking that and taking out what it needs and building for the other specific platforms. If I take my Android here, my APK is ready, download this, let's delete my other old ones here so I can rename that. Let's go over to my, let's deploy this. I've got an Android emulator up and running. Again, this was the Windows build that I did. Thank you, Android. I didn't set this up to do that. I realized I work for Microsoft. I didn't do this intentionally. Let's try this one more time. Let's see if it actually deployed. The deployment was success. It looks like Launcher's just acting up. Tick, tock. All right, so we'll give that 1 second to run in the background. This actually shows up the exact same way. It shows that exact same Windows text that we had on there. So this compiles out to the actual platform-specific versions. There's pros and cons to this approach because it tries to make a best guess approach. You can kind of tailor that some with plugins. A lot of folks I've spoken to with PhoneGap actually like to have separate builds for each separate platform, and they'll upload them all separately. That way you can kind of manage each of your platforms separately. If you have platform-specific code, you kind of don't have to worry about it mixing across with other platforms. Did this show up? This did not show up. So I'll close that. We'll let it run in the background. I'll start that up again. Maybe we'll come back to that later. Okay, so let's move on here. So PhoneGap, it's a real easy win cross-platform. If you are looking to develop on a particular platform and you're not going to go elsewhere, sure, go native, right? That's kind of the common sense approach. If you're going to go multi-platform and you're a web developer, you can't go wrong with PhoneGap. PhoneGap supports all the major ones, Windows 8, Windows Phone 8, iOS, Android, BlackBerry, I think a couple other ones as well. Anybody check out the AppGyver, gentleman over there? So AppGyver was something I found that we were having a discussion a few weeks ago, and somebody goes, well, what about AppGyver? And so that kind of led to some investigation into AppGyver, and lo and behold, their CEO is here. He's got a table out there. I definitely checked him out. If you're using PhoneGap for anything, one of the problems with PhoneGap is performance on some of the older and less than optimal devices, so to say. And also, depending on how you code in PhoneGap, you might have some performance issues. So AppGyver is built on top of PhoneGap, and they take a different approach. They've kind of gone in where some of the slow areas are and re-architected them to perform better. PhoneGap uses one web view, so they try to use multiple web views so you don't have this kind of time in reloading stuff in the same web view. They have another web view ready to go. They do things like on iOS, for example, certain things are done through essentially a protocol request. So JavaScript will request a protocol like this, and the native bridge is listening for that event. JavaScript being single-threaded, it hangs to wait for that. It slows down a lot. So they've tried to fix that by using WebSockets behind the scenes to communicate in the application. They have their own build system, similar to PhoneGap build that I showed you. They also had a really cool tool that I just saw yesterday, which was a component GUI design system. Now, anytime I hear GUI design system, I'm like, okay, grown. But they are doing it for professional developers. You can kind of do drag, drop, and typing, but it will also generate all of your code for you. You can do whatever you want with unit tests as well. Definitely go check them out. I was really intrigued by the performance enhancements that they're making on top of PhoneGap over there. So those two talk about the base technology, right? Those are what you can do to get your base layer working to be able to access your device functionality. Well, what about when you want to do UIs? And there's a couple things. I mentioned you can do something like jQuery mobile. There's Essential Touch, which the idea behind that is to give you a UI look and feel for each platform, but you're running it through HTML JavaScript. That can run on top of PhoneGap. Anybody running that right now? Essential Touch? Okay, interesting. So I haven't spoken to many folks that are using it. I know the technology is out there. Part of the issues that I see with that is right here. So they have a really cool video on their site where they actually go through the Facebook application and they write the Facebook application using their technology, and they show it is as responsive as, if not more responsive than the native version. The point being that the HTML5 Facebook application was written awful. I had actually confirmation of that the other day speaking. Anybody go to Developer Week LA? No? Okay, one of the guys that was there, they worked with the initial Facebook. Anybody on the initial Facebook team that developed that? Okay, so they worked with that team, and they said they were all very smart individuals, smart in certain areas of the web, but they were not great at writing mobile applications. They had a couple like test applications, and they threw them together to create, you know, one of the world's largest mobile HTML5 applications. As such, it performed dismally. So the idea is you can have better performance, but again, it's going to be device specific. It's going to be on how you write it. So I kind of shy away from some of the existing easy-to-use frameworks just because they might work on your device, and suddenly you hear a lot of other users start complaining they're slow on that. So as such, all of these technologies, basically, when you use HTML and JavaScript across each platform, how do they do it? Stuck inside of your application is a web view control, typically. And anybody ever try the SunSpider tests? A couple folks. So here's SunSpider, which I always enjoy seeing the battle between Internet Explorer and Chrome. I loaded up SunSpider on both, and I'll be honest. So there's some tests where IE will kill Chrome, and there's some tests where Chrome will absolutely kill IE. So I like running different tests to kind of see where it comes up. Internet Explorer 11, I'm running Windows 8.1 on here, and this has IE 11, which was just released, which they basically removed a whole bunch of old IE code in there that was not standards compliant, that was IE specific code. Remember, as a designer, you're like, I hate LA. I mean, LA. Is that a Freudian slip? I hate IE. And you had the code you're detecting of IE6, IE7, IE8. It was awful. So they actually went in and they said, we're going to take out those old API calls, and we're actually changing user agent strings, so there's no MSIE in it anymore. We don't want people to be able to do IE detection. We just want to work like another standards compliant browser. And the speed of it now is actually pretty impressive. I ran this several times in here. So SunSpider on IE 11 gives 453 overall, and on Chrome it gives 710 overall. So just to show you that IE can definitely keep up with it, and we'll see where this is leading in a moment with that. SunSpider running on different platforms here. If you're running it on iOS, if you do it directly in the browser, here is the result. Of course, the lower number is better. The web view results are absolutely awful. Windows 8.1 in the browser, web view, Android, same thing. Now, here was the interesting one to note. Windows 8.1 HTML5 apps. So this doesn't mean you're loading up a browser on the system. These are actually full native applications, which we'll talk about in just a little bit here. The browser results were 151, web view results were 221. So pretty close, and also really low results on there as well. So the reason I mention this is if you're going to be looking at developing on a platform, you know, you want performance to be the #1 important thing. I'm not personally a fan of doing the single UI across multiple devices. It just doesn't give the users, in my opinion, the best experience. You might completely disagree with that, and that's why there's kind of two camps of thought on that. You might say jQuery mobile and everything works great for us, and it might. Just for me personally, I would rather go kind of native UI where I can on that. So the integration between HTML, JavaScript developers, PhoneGap developers, and doing a native UI on something like Windows 8 provides you a really cool opportunity on there. So why should you even think about developing Windows 8 HTML apps? How many of you folks have any applications in any other app store? iOS, Android? No. Cool. Just a couple of you. All right. So let me ask anybody that wants to speak up on that. How come no applications yet? I know the standard answer is no time, I'm busy with life. That's the easy one, right? we're web developers. The story for doing web development on platforms hasn't been very strong before. Now with Windows 8 HTML apps, and before I worked at Microsoft, I was a software architect for many years, emphasis on web security, did hack-proofing courses. So I love the web, I love JavaScript, I love HTML, really cool stuff. And I came over to a platform like Windows 8 HTML apps. All right, let me find out what this is all about. And when I kind of started diving into technology more, I was like, this is pretty neat. Windows 8, as of now, has over 120 million copies sold. Someone told me a stat the other day. They saw one of the websites reporting 150 million active. That was an external source that told me that. The idea is you can take your web development skills and you can use them in either PhoneGap or natively on the platform or a combination of the two to have some really high-performing applications. So here's just a couple samples, or many samples, of things that are HTML JavaScript on the platform. This one I mentioned early on. Almost everybody's heard of this game. Almost everybody's played it. This is a great game. This is an HTML JavaScript application on Windows 8. They actually rewrote this physics engine here in JavaScript on the platform. The Windows Store itself, the application that you use to get everything on the platform. This is an HTML JavaScript application. So this is what every user will go in and say, hey, I want to find a game, I like zombies. And this is how they install on their platform. Every single installation of Windows has this on there. So over 100 million folks can have access to the application that you can package up as a web developer and sell in a store. In addition, this application itself that we do this through is an HTML JavaScript application. So it is a first-class citizen on the platform. It's not kind of a second thought. There's actually several other applications distributed by default with Windows 8 and 8.1 that are native HTML JavaScript applications. And the reason that's important is because if you're looking at, as a web developer, using your technologies in the app economy, then use something like PhoneGap. You can target multiple platforms, but you can go native, essentially, with all the controls and everything. What do I mean by that? Let's look at this look and feel right here. These are Windows 8 controls. You don't have to use them. You can do any sort of HTML, JavaScript in these applications, and I'll show you that in just a few minutes here. There's a really cool application that a few of us worked on internally. This is called Code Show. The interface is very basic, and I think we made it basic by default. But I just want to show you this look and feel, this list view, this kind of Metro, modern UI, all the different terms being thrown around. That in general is called a list view. If I want to do a list view, I can hand code this all by HTML, JavaScript, but we provide 1 or 2 lines of code that you can use in the platform to create UIs like this. And we actually created this application here called Code Show, so you can look at some code demos, and then if you like them, you just say see the code, and this is exactly your snippet for it. So in order to do the data, right here, this simple list, so we've got 4 lines of code that created the list, got a reference to our HTML element. This is just a shortcut to query, essentially query selector. We assigned a data source, which is all of our JSON, JavaScript object notation. There's nothing special about this. And we specified an HTML template, 4 lines of code, and we created this simple list view. So the code base itself is very easy and very short, and we'll look at some examples in a little bit more in depth here in a second. But the important thing as a web developer, somebody that you want to go on their platform and make money, I think there's a tremendous opportunity. If you're on Apple, if you're on Android, and you want to be in those marketplaces, awesome. If you're going to use PhoneGap and deploy to those marketplaces, very cool. It's a 70-30 revenue split. And by default with us, as soon as you come on our platform, it's a 70-30 split as well. Once your application reaches 25 grand, you now keep even more of your money. It's an 80-20 split. Now that's with a revenue share. That's if you sell your application in the marketplace or if you use us for in-app purchase. You don't have to do that. One of the things with the platform is that you can bring any commerce provider that you want. You could use PayPal to do your payments if you want, and then Microsoft gets absolutely nothing of that. So there's an opportunity on our platform for monetization that kind of, I think, is a little bit enhanced on top of some other platforms. If you want to actually develop and debug on the platform, PhoneGap can handle that. You can actually do some kind of rudimentary debugging through PhoneGap. But I say anytime that you want to debug natively for a platform, you should have the development tools. On the Windows platform, that's going to be Visual Studio. If you're going to be doing Android, you're going to want Eclipse. If you want iOS, you're going to want Xcode, and debug your actual packages from PhoneGap that way. If you are interested in checking out Windows 8, there's a 90-day free trial. If any of you in this room are, if you have a startup, if you have a company that's less than 5 years old, you make less than $1 million in annual revenue, and you are not a public company, we have a program called BizSpark. Come see me afterwards over at the Microsoft booth. We give literally tens of thousands of dollars of free software, free cloud services, free tokens to be able to develop and deploy to the phone store, the Windows Store. So that's our BizSpark program. So before we dive into some more code examples here, I just want to talk about what this system is. We're all used to desktop apps. Desktop apps, think of any major platform that you run, whether you're on a Mac or whether you're on a PC, you have traditional desktop applications developed in some sort of binary language. Separately, think of your tablet type applications. On our platform, those are called Windows Store applications, and they use a special API called WinRT. This kind of gives that sandbox approach. Think of an iPad application that you run, right? It's a sandbox application or an Android application. Same type of thing here. It's a sandbox environment that you have access to communication data, low-level API that you can access geolocation, access the webcam through, and you can do it through a variety of languages. So for everybody here, the cool thing is HTML and JavaScript, and again, we're going to dive into some code samples here in just a second. But if you happen to be a developer that prefers strongly typed languages like C# or VB, you can do it there. Or if you like C, C++, and XAML, you can create applications like that as well. So you have multiple ways to access the same API, package them up, and sell them in the Windows Store. Let's go ahead and look at what Windows, anybody here running Windows 8? A couple folks. I think, tell you what, I will give 2 license upgrades away today to Windows 8. They've been burning a hole in my pocket. I like giving away stuff. That's the cool part about the job. So Windows 8, a very, very, very quick interface run through. Rumor had it we took away the start button. It's all gone. You have this little thing in the lower right-hand corner here. Let me get out of the slide here. And that just pops up the start screen. Yes, there's no start menu anymore. If you happen to be used to a start menu, the world has changed, right? We are now in more of a touch environment. I can run this perfectly without touching my screen, but it also works great for a touch environment. This shows me 95% of the applications I run here, my dev tools, my art and design tools, and my games. If I want anything else, there's the rest of my applications. So the interface is actually pretty basic. I can still get access to all the same stuff I had before. But now on both the phone and Windows 8 and coming Xbox, we're having consistent UIs. So the idea is that we're trying to merge everything across platforms. I don't know if you've seen one yet, a Windows Phone, come check it out. Reason being is the interface looks kind of like this. I set it up the way I want. Your store applications that you can sell as an HTML JavaScript developer get distributed and can show up on somebody's start screen like this. If I go into the store application, just so I can show you 2. If I swipe down from the top, I can get an app bar. If I don't have a touch screen, I can just right-click and get it. And the other gesture here is when I swipe in from the side, the standard interface here. I can get to my application settings from here. I can search my system. So the UI is fairly basic, just a couple actions that I can do on there. Let's go ahead and talk about the versions, and then we'll dive into some code samples. And I want to clear this up because even before I worked at Microsoft, this was a bit confusing. We have 2 versions of Windows, and marketing did kind of a bad job on this. We have Windows 8, full version. You can run anything on it, right? You can run other virtual machines on it. You can run any application that you want on there. Windows RT is for ARM-based systems. As such, they're supposed to have longer battery lives. There's more restrictive rules on running applications on them. You don't want an application sitting there churning all the time, just destroying your battery. So as such, Windows Store. These sandbox applications that have stringent rules around how they run. Now, we're not going to talk about all the rules today because that's a huge API discussion. I kind of want to keep it away from that. But applications that you get from the Windows Store that you can put up there as an HTML JavaScript developer can go on any of these versions of Windows. Doesn't matter. You don't need to care about the version. If you're an HTML JavaScript developer, you can create these apps and deploy them to any of those devices, and it runs on actually over 2,500 devices, different device types. Let's go ahead and show a quick example. Let's do some code now. Let me close the PhoneGap one out. The interface between the 2 of them is actually really similar between doing PhoneGap and between doing a native application here, because it's just HTML JavaScript. I'm going to do a new project and choose, I have different template types. I can do these Windows 8 look and feel type applications. It'll give everything all set up with some template data to start that I can go ahead and start changing. Or I can just do a blank application. If you are already comfortable with JavaScript and all your CSS, a blank app works great. In fact, I'll drag a couple JavaScript files in here and we'll do something fun with this. So this, when it comes up here, it's comprised of a default.html. There's no surprises there. We had our PhoneGap application had an index.html. The name of it doesn't actually matter. Couple script references, style sheet, and content goes here. If we run it, it's got a splash screen. Every Windows Store application has a splash screen. And this is it. This is an HTML JavaScript application running natively, just like we saw the PhoneGap application running natively. So this in of itself is actually pretty boring. This is where you would want to do something with it. So just as for this demo, I grabbed some code off the net. I want to add a reference to some maps here. And bring in those JavaScript files, actually one JavaScript file. And so what I'm going to do is bring in this other JavaScript file, and we're going to create one div. This JavaScript file here. And this single div here that says my map, we're going to replace the content that was here with just a single div. And drop a couple images in here. Cool. Now this JavaScript code calls into geolocation. How do I know that? It does it through just a couple lines of code here. We create a new geolocation object, and again, the API doesn't matter too much here. There's different ways to do this. I just want to show you that it's getting geolocation. And this is going to cause us a problem to start. As soon as I run this, let me add a reference to actually this JavaScript file right here, and run this application. We're going to get an exception, access denied, and that's intentional, because what happened was I'm trying to access something special on my device. It could be the camera, it could be network services, it could be, in this particular case, I'm trying to access geolocation. And so what do we know about applications, app economy applications nowadays? They want to declare what's going to happen with them. Easy enough. I know I want to access location services. So all of these applications have what's called an AppX manifest. This is where you come in here and you basically say, hey, by the way, I want to use location services. And that way, when this gets packaged and sent up to the store, users can see what it accesses on your system. And it will actually prompt you when you use it. We run this. I'm actually going to start this twice just because of an issue in one of the builds I'm using here with something. It's prompting me, hey, do you want to use your location?
So is it actually asking that every time it uses it when running the app, or is it only
It's just the first time. Just the first time. You got it. So what did I do here? I included the div. I threw in some JavaScript I got from the net and a reference to a map package. And I've got a complete localized traffic overlay here. This is a full-out Windows Store application. This can be packaged up and sold at a store if I wanted to put my super traffic local app. Of course, it doesn't do the best thing on earth, but I could imagine packaging this with local gas prices and Yelp and Groupon and some other things, and now you've got a great local city hub application, right? The idea is the functionality behind this, it was extremely easy to use, extremely easy to implement. This was all just HTML and JavaScript. All going through this. If you want to use Google Maps as well, fine. I happen to use Bing Maps here. This was a sample I found on the net. You can use anything in here, HTML, JavaScript. If you say, you know what, I love jQuery. Can I use jQuery in here? Sure. You can add the reference manually, or you can use something as part of Visual Studio called NuGet. Install package jQuery. You can just simply right and click in here and add your local jQuery script references, but I love doing it like this. NuGet, I think, is the awesomest thing since sliced bread. It's another package manager. It's a very powerful package manager because it stores the version that's in your application, which you can then upgrade or downgrade, or I can actually just remove, uninstall jQuery, and watch that scripts folder will then go bye-bye. So you can absolutely use jQuery in these applications. You can use client-side JavaScript libraries. It's really, there's really no limitation.
Is it possible to use remote URLs in those SRC values of the SRC?
So that's a good question. Can you use remote URLs right here? Yes and no. In these applications, there's two security contexts you run in. There's a local and a web. Right now, this is part of my packaged up application. So this is running in my local context. I can throw on an iframe in here that points to a web URL. And everything that's inside of there, I can load in remote scripts. But you say, well, what if I want to do this locally? You can actually create local content and you add an attribute to it to say, I want to allow this to run in the web context. So there's essentially a security barrier between the two of them. And in that case, you can reference remote files. So in your default page that you're looking at here, you cannot. But you can simply, there's two other ways to do it that you can include it into here. In your application, or you can include something that points out to the web to do it as well. As another benefit of the platform too, you can have cross-domain AJAX calls here. You don't have to worry about cores or doing any of that kind of setup. Cross-domain AJAX calls are allowed by default. There's no problem with that. And if you've ever dealt with cores and getting that set up, it's not fun, right? It's a pain. So when I found that out, I was like, yes, really cool. Yeah.
The framework will take care of cross-domain AJAX call, or?
Yeah, there's actually no, so in browsers, when they make the browsers, you've got same origin policy, and they have that problem, as it's coded in the browser. This platform, they made the decision that when they've implemented the engines in here, they said we're going to allow that. So you just give the URL and it calls it. There's nothing else you have to set up. You can do a jQuery.ajax call and just specify whatever.com, whatever file. There's no problem with that at all. In fact, that will kind of lead to another demo we'll talk about. So, okay, you say. So this is HTML JavaScript code. Where does it actually run? Does it run inside of a browser? It does not run in a browser. There's a host that gets loaded up. And Internet Explorer has two components of it. So these are not running inside of Internet Explorer. I just want to make that clear. However, Internet Explorer uses these two components, as well as some other products at Microsoft use these components. There's a JavaScript engine and there's a rendering engine. Internet Explorer just happens to use those in its build. Windows 8 has this set up for these store applications that uses those same components. As such, it actually allows you to do some really cool things. Let me open up my next demo here. The fact that it uses these shared components means this is a Twitter kind of search application. We'll walk through this in a second here. So Visual Studio is the main design tool here. As I showed you earlier, you can build with PhoneGap. You can actually do a separate platform, load up the PhoneGap build, then export to Windows. You can kind of do a whole bunch of mix and match there. The development tool on our platform that allows you some really cool debugging and capabilities is Visual Studio. There's also, Visual Studio is not an HTML design tool. You can type it in here. It has JavaScript sense. In other words, I can come in here and say JS dots, and I can get all these methods. So it has kind of code completion in here. But this is not a design environment. It's not like a Dreamweaver. We have a tool that integrates called Blend. And Blend is not just an HTML design tool for these store applications. What it actually does in addition, because we have this here, these two components that Internet Explorer uses, that these Windows Store applications use, that this development tool uses as well. And so as such, let me zoom this back a little bit. As such, it's actually basically running my application during development mode here. So I can come in here, I can see all my DOM, all of my properties. I can do all my CSS design on the right-hand side here with some really powerful things. I want to view only my set properties on something. You get full navigation, and this shows you, think of all like Firebug and Chrome Developer Tools. This gives you a live view on everything where you can alter everything. The difference is this actually modifies your source. And you can do some really cool things here too. You can run this interactively. So this requires a user interaction to clear. I can actually go into something called interactive mode and clear that. And then click on this text box, go out of interactive mode, and start modifying properties in here. So that's just a design tool. I don't want to spend too much time on there. I just want to show you that that is part of it. One of the benefits of being able to use these two engines. All right, so let's step through. Actually, we're going to bypass that because I already showed you a basic application. In these applications, you can use all HTML controls. You can use jQuery mobile if you want. There's also there's two namespaces in these applications that matter. There's a Win.js, which you don't have to use, and there's a Windows namespace, which you don't have to use either. But if you want to use them, they give you access to built-in controls. For example, when I showed you Code Show, these list views, these are built in. Or the Windows Store, these controls are built in. You don't have to use them though. If you want to access storage or geolocation, graphics and printers, audio playback, media capture, networking, then you use the Windows namespace. You can do this all natively in JavaScript. You can come in here and say Windows dot, and you can see right here data, devices, globalization, graphics, management. It's a very powerful API. If you're a C++ developer, you have access to the same API. If you're a C# developer, same API, and you can call it as well from JavaScript. There's some really cool technology they use in the compiler that makes it callable across all these languages. Now, for styling apps, it's just CSS. There's no magic here. If you want to use CSS media queries, that's fine. These are just style sheets included here like you would in any other application. Just HTML, JavaScript application. There's nothing proprietary, nothing special. There are some certain built-in controls that have vendor prefixes. There's when they had the Flexbox, the grid, when things went to specification, the next version of this came out and they removed the vendor prefixes. So because we do some stuff because it's our environment, there are some controls that have vendor prefixes because we emit some really cool HTML. It runs only in our environment. Some folks ask, can we create these applications and run them on a website? You can't. These applications are meant for going up to the Windows Store, to package them, put them in the Windows Store, sell them, provide them for free. However, with that said, if you have a bunch of current logic or data binding or client data libraries or already HTML on your website, you can take that and put them into these applications. You can actually you can load content from a website as well. Now to your question, you said can you use remote scripts? You can also load remote content if you want as well. Ideally, you want to balance that carefully because these applications could potentially be used offline. So you just don't want one of these applications to just turn around and load your website. That wouldn't be a very appropriate approach. And what happens if the user is disconnected, right? Not everything's going to load properly. So can you copy and paste an existing site? I probably wouldn't go with that approach. Reason being is existing websites are not very touch-friendly. This should be a touch-friendly environment. Win.js, again, which I said you don't have to use, provides some built-in style sheets that's there in the default template application. If you look right up top, by default it has the style sheet in it. Again, you don't have to use it. You can use anything that you want in here. So because time's getting kind of short, I want to talk about a couple important subjects here. Let me show you this demo and the code that powers it, because there's just a few lines. I've grabbed a couple packages off the net, one to do OAuth, and then I grabbed the sample off of Twitter to basically call out to load some tweets up. And then I have some code here to bind some tweets. In other words, to take that resulting JSON and map it out to my UI. So I'm going to run this application and watch it terminate. I typed in something in here that blew this up. Give me one quick second here. Tweet search. Ah, right there. I have a rogue character. I forgot to delete that. So this is the Windows 8 kind of look and feel. You can style these controls however you want. What I actually did was I went onto Twitter's website. How many of you have ever looked at a segment on a website, thought, you know what, I would like to kind of reproduce that. And then you go into your developer tools and you look at it and you're like, huh, it references 87 style sheets. Well, which styles do I need to use out of that? So I would just, as a side note here, I want to talk about a really cool thing called HTML Clipper. Everybody, every web developer in this room download it. It runs in Chrome and Firefox. It's kind of like a little JavaScript booklet that you paste up here. And it tells you HTML Clipper's on. Press W to select the parent element, and press S to clip it. So let's try this. There we go. And it just generated everything in a completely reusable block that you can paste in your application and use. It doesn't require any external style sheets. It's really cool. So that's what I did for this. I basically came into here into my application, and I plucked off. It's a really long, ugly template too. They did a ton of code in here. It's basically this code. That's what I got from the Twitter site. It's all just a bunch of divs and items. And that's what gives us this look. So I bound to that template with about 4 lines of code in there. That's kind of what I showed you earlier in that code show application. If I click on something, it'll launch it in the browser next to it. Let's close that out here. The other thing I want to show you, since this is on App Economy Opportunities, notice what's on the bottom of this application when it loads up. This is pure HTML JavaScript. I can throw this up to the store. And my resolution here is kind of preventing me from... So you don't see it with my screen layout here. There's actually a small ad at the bottom here. And it completely cuts off on that screen. You can't see it on that screen. It's going to be kind of funny to show you the code for the ad that you can't see. But I will show it to you anyway, because this is how easy it is to include an ad on the platform. I have a div that uses HTML5 data dash attributes to say, hey, this is a special ad control. And there's JavaScript that runs behind the scenes that looks for this and says, okay, we're going to, in turn, emit out some JavaScript, some HTML in its place. And here's the application ID that I've got from what's called Microsoft's Pub Center. On Microsoft's Pub Center, you come in here and define an application ID. You define your application, my super card game. It gives you an ID, and then you create an ad, and it gives you an ID for that ad unit. And you simply drop those in here, and it creates the ad in its place. With that said, advertising. How good is advertising? This was written by a guy on our team. It's not the best looking application in the world. It's not the worst looking application in the world. He did this for Windows 8 initially. It's a very blocky feel. It's got a bunch of card games in here. You might be thinking, you know what? I could work with a designer and create something that looks way better than this. It's a functional card game, a whole bunch. It's a series of card games. He uses Pub Center for ads down here. Last I spoke to him, he was getting 30 grand a month off his ad revenue from this card game. So when you look at what this application does, and he likes to talk about it a lot too. I said, aren't you worried about competition? Somebody else, basically another suite of card games. He goes, I welcome the competition. So let that be known. A card game is an awesome use of an ad. Why? Because what do? They sit there forever and they stare at cards and they mess around with cards, right? It's actually a pretty genius use of ads because it's the best use of it. They sit there and stare at that screen all the time. That was using only ads on the Microsoft platform. Being multi-platform developers, there are other solutions available. And there's ones like you can do Ad Rotator. Is open source project you can use, and you configure different ad providers in there. You say, you know what, show the Pub Center 25% of the time. Show AdMobi or something 30% of the time. And you can divvy up which ad networks you want to use and change them based on how you see your ad revenue coming in. There's all different options. We don't care about the options on the platform. You write the app, you can bring your own commerce, or you can use ours. If you bring your own, we make no money off that, and that's what we hope is a plus to the platform. The financial opportunity is better. What time did we go till? 2 minutes ago? All right, so I'll cover one quick last subject here. One thing that I do is the analytics that I have in this application. When you come in and you search for something, you can search for a tweet in here, And the code, I log some analytics. If you come in and search for some particular text, I say, you searched for this. It's one line of code to implement analytics in your application. So for every action that I do in this application, I use a system in here called Markup. This is a Windows 8 specific one. You can bring other analytics platforms here. There are plenty of platforms that support Windows 8, as well as Android, iOS, etc. But the idea is it's very easy to implement. I can come in here and see how much time you spent in that per day, or custom events. If you click on a tweet, I showed you before, you can come in here and click on a tweet. If I come in here and do this, I log that action for analytics as well. Let me go back to this and refresh this. So there's our day. We can see our metrics for this particular day when this was one line of code to implement. There's plenty of HTML, JavaScript supported engines out there. The important point is, please implement analytics in your application. It's so easy. There's developers I've talked to that said, you know, I'm not making as much money as I hoped. Where do users drop out in your applications? I don't know. It's one line of code to add analytics. It's very easy. So with that said, because I think we are over time, because I didn't get to talk about some cloud stuff. If you are interested in cross-platform stuff, you can add, with about 2 lines of code, the ability to dynamically have a cloud-based database that you can access. With 2 lines of code, you can say, hey, insert this record, send up JavaScript object notation, it reads a schema and inserts it into a database in the cloud. 2 lines of code across iOS, Windows Store, Android. If you guys have any interest in that for any of your applications, or even for HTML, JavaScript websites, we can do that. Come talk to me over there afterwards. And lastly, let me hand these out. Please grab one of these, fill one out. We're having a raffle today for a Lumia 1020, the brand new Nokia phone that's got the 41 megapixel camera on it. Fill this out, just walk over to the Microsoft booth and drop it into the little bin there. And we're having a raffle today. You don't have to be present to win. We will let you know. Thank you very much.